It gives me great pleasure to call on our panelists for this evening's conversation. Bindu Fernandez, who is the Executive Director at Narika.
Hi, everyone. Such a joy to be here.
Hi, Bindu. Um, Bindu has been trained as a domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking counselor, and thanks, Bindu, for joining us today. We're also joined by Zakia Afreen, a manager, client advocacy programs for Maitri. Hi, Zakia.
Hello.
Hi, Zakia.
So Maitri does transformative work empowering survivors for the South Asian community, and we're looking forward to your insights today. I'd also like to finally introduce to you Shailaja Dikshit, the community engagement specialist at SAVE. Hi, Shailaja.
Hi.
The SAVE stands for Safe Alternatives to Violent Environments. Shailaja also serves as commissioner on the Contra Costa Commission for Women. I do want to take this occasion to specifically thank Shailaja and Deepthi Warrior from SAVE for connecting us with these wonderful women. And then Deepthi Warrior also specifically since she conceptualized this evening, and we thank her for her passionate undertaking. We would like to make this an interactive conversation, so please do use the Q&A button that's available at the bottom of your Zoom screens to ask a question to any one of our panel members. So with that, Malvika, I'll hand it over to you briefly.
Yes, I'd also like to take a moment here to acknowledge a very special guest in our audience today. It's our honor to welcome Attorney Sabrina Farrell, who's the Assistant District Attorney of Alameda County and the Executive Director of Alameda County Family Justice Center. Thank you so much for coming. We'd love to hear from you at any point during our discussion this evening. Please do use the Q&A feature to let us know when you're ready to talk, and we'll call upon you. Thank you.
Lovely. So allow me to start the discussion with a question to you, Bindu, and Zakia and Shailaja, please feel free to add your perspectives as well. Bindu, could you tell us what is domestic violence and help us understand certain cultural nuances that are related to domestic violence?
Of course. There is a textbook definition of domestic violence, and it is the pattern of behaviors to maintain control and power over somebody else in an intimate partner. So this is the textbook definition of domestic violence. And what's interesting about this definition really is all the things it mentions and all the things it really does not mention. So for example, one of the core perspectives in domestic violence is really control and power. It doesn't speak to whether it is physical, whether it's emotional, financial, etc., but really just this pattern of behaviors that exerts control and power. The other piece I'll say is no one is exempt from domestic violence. Again, this definition does not talk about a specific gender, a specific race, a specific sexual orientation. It does happen to everyone, of course, disproportionately high with women, and women are survivors disproportionately, but really can happen to anybody, and nobody is exempt, whether socioeconomic or otherwise. One of the things I always reflect about is what is really the difference between conflict in marriages, which everyone in a marriage has experienced, versus domestic violence. And something that I've come to recognize is the intimidation and the fear that kind of happens at the core of domestic violence versus conflict that might happen in every marriage. So there's a lot of different forms of abuse, which many of which were shown in the play. Some of it is physical, there is emotional abuse, there is financial abuse where someone may control the money in the house and really ask you to account for every penny in the home. There is sexual abuse that can happen. There is reproductive abuse that can happen where someone may ask that you have to have children or have to have sex when you may not want to. And there's also threats. It could be the threats of taking your child away from you, threat of not, just threats in general, threats and intimidation, I'd say. You asked a very interesting question about cultural nuances and really what is it that certain cultural groups or certain immigrant communities face that might be additional complexities of domestic violence. And this is, a treasure, I mean, a whole thing in itself, right? But some of the things that come to mind is many cultures, including our South Asian culture, has a lot of traditional values of honor, and sexuality, especially when it comes to our women. And those play a role in really how someone responds when domestic violence happens at home. There's also a lot of domestic violence as a family issue when it comes to certain cultures, like many of our South Asian cultures, where, hey, we talk about it within our homes and it is not something we bring out into the community or something. It's not for us to air our dirty laundry out in public. So that can be one of the cultural responses to domestic violence happening, where our survivors or any of us might feel like, hey, we want to contain it within the house. It doesn't have to go outside the home. Of course, there are many responses around fear of law enforcement, immigration complexities. So many of our immigrant survivors may be on an H4, exactly like the play suggested, where the person causing them harm might be someone who is the primary visa holder. And these are instances, again, where you really have to choose between, do I stay in an abusive relationship or leave the US and go back to India or back away from my US citizen children? And all these kind of add to the additional complexities that certain cultures and many immigrant survivors face.
That is wonderful.
Thank you, Bindu. And, I actually have a question for Zakia. Zakia, ever since the pandemic and the shelter in place has started, we've heard that there has been an increase in observed cases of domestic violence. In your experience over the last few months, what has really changed during COVID-19? What are the trends? What have you seen? If you could just share something with us about that.
Right. First of all, thank you for putting together such a beautiful play. I mean, it touches on so many different aspects of domestic violence, right from the beginning, the patriarchy, the growing up of the girl child, and turning into a woman and still experiencing similar situations in her life. So that was really beautiful. Wanted to thank you. And during COVID, like Bindu has actually gave a very comprehensive definition, right? What domestic violence look like. So with all of that, we have seen some additional barriers, some additional stress that survivors and victims are going through. And a lot of it has to be with the fact that you are confined at your home. Many women would choose, like we saw in the play, that she got really upset and she decided to get outside, go to the office. But at certain point, people who don't have a job, who probably just go out to meet a friend or take a walk, they're not able to go out. And that can really harm somebody's mental well-being. So in the beginning, first 2 weeks, we saw that calls were actually almost silent. Our phones were very silent because it was a shock. We went home on a Monday and Tuesday there was a shelter-in-place order. Even as an agency, we were not prepared how we could remotely offer all of these services that we all provide. But after the first few weeks, then we realized that how much it has affected the victims or survivors that are still at home, were not able to take that step outside. And for the ones that have taken that step outside, the pandemic had brought in additional troubles with finances, with housing, with their rental situation, with filling out simple paperwork when they needed English help, language help. So, if I have to mention a statistics, I will say beginning in March until last month, we have seen a 40% increase in new crisis calls, which is huge for an agency like ours that only caters to a specific South Asian community in the Bay Area and some adjacent areas. And then in the legal program also, we are overwhelmed with calls for restraining orders, for police-related matters, for hearings that's coming up, for getting ready. So this pandemic, other than the household stress, you take care of your children, you do all of the housework, all of that, and then you have this abusive relationship that you cannot escape from. So this is a storm. This is a perfect storm for many of our survivors that we are really trying to navigate through even now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zakia. And this question is for Bindu and Shaila. So most of us in the audience today are from the Bay Area and surrounding areas. What services do agencies offer to help with domestic violence?
So Narika, I'm with Narika, and Narika offers counseling programs. So we have a domestic violence helpline where anyone can call in. It's a toll-free number. Anybody can call in at any time and receive services. Usually this can range from safety planning. How do I stay safe when something is happening at home? Many times people are just trying to find out what resources there are, and not necessarily make a commitment to something. So things like, do I have any legal recourse for certain things that are happening? How do I make sure I take care of my kids, etc.? So we do have that domestic violence helpline that anybody can call into. The number is on our website. It's www.narika.org. We also have counseling services, as I shared before. We do have support groups. So these are community groups where survivors can get together with like-minded people to talk to each other and learn about resources and find community in each other. We also have job programs, which has skyrocketed during COVID-19 because a lot of our survivors have lost their jobs, especially service industry jobs. And so our job programs are usually 10 to 12 week long or personalized and intended to really support someone toward financial independence. And we do wellness programs as well. There's a lot of programs Narika does, and people can reach us through our website or call us or email us at any point to hear more about the services that we offer.
Thank you, Bindu. And Shaila.
Hi, good evening. I want to first, of course, thank Cloud Playhouse for this platform. The play was beautiful, and it's an honor to be actually with all the fellow advocates. We don't often get time or an opportunity to sit with our fellow advocates and talk about this, so I really appreciate this. In terms of services, SAVE is located in Fremont, Safe Alternatives to Violent Environments. We provide supportive services to survivors of domestic violence. And just like Bindu said, the most well-known service we have is our 24/7 crisis line, which is answered anytime anybody calls. And I do want to emphasize that anybody calling into any hotline, whether Narika, Saves, or Maitri's, it is confidential. No one is going to force you to answer anything that you don't want to answer, and it is the gateway to all services. So if there's nothing else we take away from all the services offered today, please remember the confidential hotlines are open and available to anybody who's seeking help, including friends who want to help somebody in trouble. And then apart from that, SAVE also has a safe house, which is the shelter. We have advocates who work very closely with the police departments of 5 cities. So they help you with restraining orders. They would accompany you to the courts when the courts were operating. Now with the pandemic, things are changing, of course. We have a clinical program that offers individual counseling, couples counseling, as well as support groups. Everything is running virtually right now. All of SAVE services are free. And we also have our housing program, which, as the name says, assists with housing, which can be anywhere from flexible assistance, where we are assisting with anything that will help sustain housing, such as childcare or transportation costs, to the actual subsidy of a rent as needed. So there's a whole slew of services that we offer, and our most unique offering, which right now, unfortunately, with the Empowerment Center, it is not working, but it is actually a walk-in center where any survivor can walk in to get help. The lines are still open. You can still schedule appointments, but we have a place where physically people can come in to get food, to rest. We've had women and children walk in to just use a laptop, the printer, to eat, to rest, to sleep. We've given blankets out, and they can get walk-in services with the community case manager. So I'll just say that we are grateful to the community that supports our services. That's why we're able to offer it for free. And our helpline actually has access to almost 300 languages. So if somebody calls in with a language that our staff or volunteers don't speak, we are able to immediately get help, which is very much needed in a diverse, Bay Area culture like ours. So we are appreciative to be here.
Thank you, Shaila. And Zakia, what about legal support and policy advocacy? How's that supported? Yeah.
Thank you, Malavika. I think Bindu and Shailaja has already mentioned what kind of services our agencies provide. So we also have a helpline, which is live from 9 to 3. And then afterwards, anybody can leave a message. We will pick up that message and return. So just to say about the legal program, we work very closely with attorneys and help people with their paperwork, prepare them for their court hearings, restraining order, custody-related matters mostly. We also provide immigration assistance depending on the relief people may be eligible to. And in the recent times, you have seen that so much of hostility coming out in terms of immigration uh, situation, and we find ourselves to do some of those immigration related safety planning at the first call that we have with the survivor. What are your rights if you are stopped by an law enforcement officer or even an ICE agent? What to say, what not to say, and most of all, that you have the right to remain silent before you actually get hold of an attorney. So all of those we are trying to do. And policy is something that we are slowly getting into. We realize that after 30 years, Maitri has been in the Bay Area for almost 30 years next year. And it's time for us to move on. Just putting on a Band-Aid and doing the crisis intervention is not enough. We have to go at the root of the problem and try to solve and create a healthy new generation. So in terms of policy, we do a lot of advocacy with the federal government for funding, Violence Against Women's Act related funding, which also comes with immigration benefits. At the state level, we regularly advocate for new laws and bills that will support survivors. You know that the governor has signed the grassroots grant for many undocumented immigrants who did not really qualify to get any unemployment or the IRS benefits. So we advocated actively for that. At the city and county level, we work with the police on their responses, making sure that language access is provided, which Shailaja mentioned. It's very important in the Bay Area to have language access for people when they not only come to our agency, but also go outside to the police, to the court for that, and cultural responsiveness. That all the justice partners know that people from South Asia, people from African countries, people from all these different parts of the world, they need culturally responsive services, not just one size fits all. So we do quite a bit. And in the Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we are, a lot of our volunteers, they are going to different city council meetings, doing public comment for raising awareness on domestic violence. And we just got a commitment from the Newark mayor that he's going to give us a resolution commemorating this month. I think Shailaja did it with San Ramon last year, if I'm not wrong. So that's really exciting for us. And lastly, I also want to mention that regularly, like many other DV organizations, I'm sure that both of my colleagues here, they can agree, we also get behind the intersectional movements like Black Lives Matter. It is very important for us to make sure law enforcement is not discriminating against people of color, because it's not just the Black people, right? It's all of us. It can affect all of us, or any kind of draconian policy that targets one specific group, like the Muslim ban, that these are really harmful. So we readily always get behind these movements and try to make sure that our survivors are not facing yet additional barriers for this. Shailaja, you wanted to say something?
Nothing. I was just nodding my head really vehemently to say I so agree with you on the intersectionality of it, because anywhere, any movement, any injustice, at the heart of it, if you look at homelessness, disability, unemployment, uh, really survivors are impacted. They're the most vulnerable in any community. And truly, if we treat domestic violence as something that happens by itself, we are not going to be able to resolve it. There's really systemic impacts to what is causing somebody to experience it, and then what keeps them in the cycles of that domestic violence. So Zaki, I couldn't agree more with you on how important it is for us to really recognize and work with all the movements around us, be it racial, social, economic, whatever injustice we are talking about. So
Lovely. Thanks, Zakia, for providing that. So this next question I bring to you from our audience. It's from Savita, and it speaks to allyship and friends and family. So Bindu, I might come to you for this. I'll read the question. It says, Savita says, I once called one of the Bay Area DV groups on behalf of a friend who was being abused, but was so frozen in her response that she was unable to act, and was told that I could not act on her behalf since I needed to hear from her. I understand the need for privacy and confidentiality, but what is the best way to help someone in such a situation when one simply cannot move but wants to leave and be helped?
So if I understand that question correctly, I'm guessing the friend called on behalf of someone, and the survivor itself probably wasn't sure about what to do.
That
Is
is
that?
right. The survivor ended up not wanting to talk about it. And then the friend asks, how can I best help someone who clearly needs help, but doesn't, want to take action at that point?
Absolutely. I would start by saying it's important to listen and to listen. I mean, start by listening and start by believing, which I'm sure you are doing. The important part about listening really in the story is if it seems like your friend does not want to do anything, it's important to respect those choices. It may seem very difficult. We all are extremely invested in our friends and our families, and it might be difficult to say, hey, why is it that you can't do anything? But it's really important to pause and listen to really what they're saying, because many times that survivor will make that decision for themselves, whatever it is, whether it is to stay in that relationship or not. So I'd always start by saying listen and believe. Being discreet is something I would always recommend as well. It's really important that as someone shares the story, yes, of course you can share it with a DV agency, but really to kind of hold that story for yourself, because it's really not our stories to tell. It is somebody else's story to tell, right? Apart from that, I'd say it goes back to the centering the story, centering the survivor in this entire decision making. If that survivor does not want to do anything, or does not want to take action, does not want to leave, does not want to involve law enforcement, physicians, etc., that's really their decision to make. And the best thing you can do as a friend is to support that decision, is really show up for that survivor the way they want to be shown up. It's something I kind of try to remind myself that it is not important that we do for someone what we want for ourselves, but really do for them what they want for themselves, right? And sometimes we may want to be rescued, we may want someone to take care of us, but really if your friend says, hey, I don't want to do anything right now, maybe all you can do is bring me food, that's all you need to do. Show up for them the way they want you to show up. And that's really what I would hold that person and their needs and their wants central. Be patient. There's a lot of statistics and there's a lot of studies around how many times it takes for someone to leave and come back before they're finally ready to leave an abusive relationship. And so it's important to understand these are not decisions, just as marriages have traversed a lot of time and relationships traverse time, so does leaving. These are very critical, big decisions. They often involve families, involve children. So really to be patient with your friend in terms of whatever it is they need. And so whether it means, again, like I said, showing up for them, being patient, not judging. And as a friend, really one of the best things you can do is reach out on their behalf to an agency and say, hey, how can I be a better friend? What else can I do to support my friend? But really showing up for them in a manner that they want you to show up for, and listening without judgment is the best thing I can offer.
I think that's a great thing for the community, for us to learn, right? Which is, even if the friend is unable to, if a survivor you think is unable to reach out, then we can better equip ourselves with knowledge, right? Figuring out if there's ways in which we can understand a little bit more about what they're going through, right? Which means not only the survivors reaching out to agencies, but the support network as well. And I think that's a brilliant takeaway. Lovely. So I did have another question. Again, it came from our audience. Vaishnavi, the question came in it. Let's see. Okay. So Shailaja, I might call on you to answer this. And of course, Zaki and Bindu, feel free to add your perspectives. So Vaishnavi says, when we speak of domestic abuse, we usually think of adult women. She really loved that the playwright brought in a young girl into the orbit of domestic abuse, mental and physical. Sadly, this is all too common. So a question is, do you ever have occasions when younger victims of domestic violence approach you for help? And if so, do you feel equipped to deal with younger people?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question. Actually, that is a wonderful question. I will step back first to say domestic violence or family violence does have the umbrella of including abuse that may be going on between family members. what we focus on in our agencies, at least I'll speak for SAVE, heavily is intimate partner violence, which is why often our language talks about the adults. I know that Maitri does a lot of work with elderly abuse. At least I've heard Zakia talk about it, so maybe she can speak to that. But in terms of the teens, there are two ways I can think of it. One is teen dating violence. So when the youth go through abuse with their intimate partner, it's called teen dating violence. And actually SAVE has a youth program. We do a lot of work in prevention, and we are gearing up to provide intervention services for youth. So we have a statewide recognized youth program. And we shouldn't forget that children are often impacted by domestic violence that's going on in the so there is a, it's not only the adults, but if there are children present in the family, they are going to be impacted by domestic violence, and they also have to be given services. So counseling for the children, helping the mother or whoever the survivor is. I say mother because we often deal with mothers, but it could be a father, it could be another caregiver, helping them give services and parent in a way that helps the healing process start. So yes, long story short, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, family violence does impact. We do have youth who call in our crisis lines. Actually, after you are 12, you are very much within your right legally. And Zakia, you can correct me if I'm misstating the age, but I believe after 12 years, you are very much allowed. And what do you say? You have a right to call, and you have a right to work on even a restraining order if that is needed for your safety. So that is something that's very much part of SAVE's services. And I really appreciate this lens on what the youth go through. Children are how it generationally keeps going on. If that's when it's normalized, that's where the cycle of violence keeps continuing. So yeah, and I'll just say this. We all think that our children don't date in our communities. They do. We have to have that conversation. Teen dating violence is very much happening in South Asian communities too, just like we are silent with adult relationships. It is a false expectation and false assumption that teen dating violence is not occurring in South Asian communities. So please, we must have this conversation with our children preventively, and we must step up to give support if we see anybody, if we sense that our youth are facing some kind of abusive relationship. Be a trusted adult.
So if I may just add to what Shaila has said, just 2 points. In terms of the teen violence, let's not forget that if a child is distressed because of domestic violence happening at the home environment, and either the school or the doctors or the justice system gets hold of that situation, the parents will be held responsible.
Yes.
They cannot get out free out of this, right? They have to take responsibility for the child. And many times we see that wrongfully, many domestic violence victims who don't even have any agency in their own relationship are held responsible that how couldn't you, protect your children. So this is another area we like to work with the state agencies to make sure that they don't hold survivors or victims who are already in a domestic violence situation even more, don't cause any more harm to them by holding them responsible and making them accountable for this. So that's one point. Second point I wanted to make, that in the story we saw the mother-in-law came and how she kind of escalated the situation between her son and the daughter-in-law. But think for a moment that this person, if this person has moved to stay with the son and got rid of whatever support system she had in the home country, she's completely at the mercy of this couple. She may be having some health issues that actually require her to maintain a strict diet, maintain a lifestyle, and anything happens with that, this couple can be held for elder abuse and elder neglect, right? And what option would this mother-in-law actually have to escape this situation? She's in a worse situation than Gitanjali, who at least had a legal degree. She was a lawyer. If she wants to do something, that is absolutely her choice. She could probably think of few options for her. what is the choice for this elderly lady? Let's
Yeah.
not forget, in our communities, we sometimes overlook that aspect, but I can tell you, we get so many calls from moms that are staying with their um, children, either
Mhm.
a daughter or a son, how overwhelmed they are with housework that has
Yes.
become their responsibility, how they are being responsible for childcare when the son and the daughter-in-law is going for a night out. So let's not forget that that is also an issue we need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Can, can I just say one more quick thing? That to Zakia's point, we do see that the mom is giving the message normalizing the violence. And oftentimes women will criticize each other saying women are the women's worst enemies. I just want to say patriarchy impacts everybody. And internalized patriarchy, when we have internalized the message and then we become the bearers of the message. Even the men are impacted. Toxic masculinity, it's not like I don't believe that anybody who's inflicting harm is in a great peaceful place of mind themselves. So just wanted to add on to that patriarchy gets everyone. So
And so, Shaila, on that note, oh, go ahead, Rita. We can't hear you, unfortunately. Oh, we still can't hear you.
Yeah, tech challenges. Can you hear me now? All
Yes.
right. Sorry, just quickly, there are two questions, and I just wanted to ask Bindu from Narika. So, Narika, does it have more? Somebody's asked. Pritika is actually asking if Narika helps girls in India as well as here. Are there? Um, do you have any resources there as well to
We
help?
do. So our toll-free number is accessible to anyone in the world. So we have around 25% of our calls coming in from India. Typically, what is happening is that there is a connection to the US. There is often an example of this could be transnational abandonment, where the person causing harm might send their spouse back to India and then divorce them or really separate or walk off. And so in those instances, usually when there's a tie back to the US, whether because of the children or someone is here in the US, someone in India might be calling us. And so that happens a lot. So we're still able to provide counseling services through the phone. Of course, there are certain programs where it's harder. There's limitations, like legal is an example. There are limitations of not necessarily being adept in the laws in India, in which case we will usually refer them to someone who is a free attorney in India as much as we can. Whatever resources we have, we're able to share. But there are certain things we're able to do and certain things that are much more local to the Bay Area. So really anybody in the world can still call in, and we welcome anybody to call in. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that, Bindu.
And I just have another question for Zakia, actually. So people experiencing domestic violence are increasingly vulnerable to homelessness, especially women and children with limited economic resources. So for example, we saw Gitanjali also facing a dilemma when she talks about the challenges of leaving her daughter in a shelter during the pandemic. So what are some of the ways in which agencies are addressing this challenge?
Thank you, Malavika. This is actually a very important question, because housing is one of the major obstacles in the Bay Area for people who are either trying to move on or even people who have very low income. It's always a struggle. Now, for somebody who is trying to escape abuse, there are definitely women's shelters, and shelters are still open. They're accepting new guests. And where in our county, when the shelters are actually full right now because of such an increase in demand, our county has provided us with some additional funds so we can actually put people in motels. As an agency, Maitri doesn't have shelter. We have a transitional housing program. And there also we have done one or two intakes during this pandemic, keeping all the safety measures in mind. We all have received free PPE from some state grant, all safety additional, whatever we may need. And I can assure you that all the shelters and agencies that are bound to meet people face to face, we are all taking extreme safety measures for the client and for ourselves. So there is no question about that. But what happens after the transitional house? What happens after the shelter? Now, the Shala mentioned that there are certain programs that you can go to subsidized housing. There are some rental assistance, and this is available depending on which county you are in. Your county may be offering that. And one good thing about these housing assistance programs are they don't just write you a check for your rent. They actually talk to you about how you can sustain yourself going forward, because they cannot provide you help beyond a certain time, right? It may be 6 months or a year at the most. What happens after that? So they will work with you with your skills, employment options, and anything else that can be relevant. So definitely I would say that if somebody is in a danger, in a very lethal situation, then not thinking about is housing safe for me, because the home is not safe, and there is so much increase in murder suicides, right? So we have to figure out what is the priority. If priority is life, is the threat is that big, then don't think about it. There are options that agencies can offer you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Zakia just said. If you are, yes, it's difficult, but if you are in a crisis and it's escalating and you're in danger, please call the hotlines. We are more telling people that's what we're committed to do. Your life is above any other complication that arises. We may need to figure a week later what are we going to do long term, but
Right.
your immediate. So Zakia, thank you for saying that.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. And especially because there's also such support for like a long-term plan, a path of self-sustenance. I think this is very good. Thank you.
I will say that we are getting a lot of comments and questions about how best to support others. And I think what Yamini mentions, that this was an eye-opener for her, right? She says, in some cases, it is okay to not jump in right away, right? It might cause more harm to the situation than bring any relief. And there are some specific questions, right? What is the role of a bystander, whether they need to step in or not? I think we've addressed it partially here, but it behooves a much longer conversation. So I would urge our audience members, if any of you have a question, comment, or confused about how best to support your friends or anybody else who you think needs help, then I would urge you to reach out to the agencies that are in the Bay Area or in the area in which you currently reside or have access to. In our panel today, of course, we have Maitri, Save, and Narika. So these are wonderful agencies in the Bay Area who you should absolutely reach out to if you have these questions. So that does bring us to almost to the end of our panel conversation. This was absolutely insightful. I do want to pose a final question, which I think would help our audience, right? So if you could, what would be one thing that you would ask our viewers today to do or keep in mind to help end cycles of violence in our community? And if I may ask Bindu, Zakia, and then Shailaja to go.
Sure. I think one is, you're asking for one, which is so difficult, but I'm like obsessing over that. But I'll start by saying, I think self-reflection, self-examination of how we contribute to the cycle of violence, how we contribute in terms of the power we have in various portions in our life is an important one. I think it comes to the root of, if we look ourselves in the mirror, we ask ourselves important questions about what do we do with the power we have? How do we contribute to, with our silence, to much of the abuse that is happening in the world, whether in our homes or in our communities? That's probably the first thing I'd say. And I'm going to put in one more. I'm setting a precedent. But the second I would be is get educated and support local nonprofits, local domestic violence nonprofits, whether it is attending an event like this, whether it's volunteering, whether it's making an in-kind donation, a financial donation, whatever it is. There's a place for you in the movement, whoever you are, whatever age you are, whatever gender you are, whatever your affiliations are, there's a place for you. And it takes all of us. It's not an issue that started yesterday. It's not an issue that's going to end tomorrow. It requires chipping away at every instance, at every aspect, at every bend of the road. So I urge all of you to be a part of the movement with us. You can contribute with your expertise, you can contribute with your money, with your voice, with your influence, whatever it is. There's a place for you in the movement, and I'd urge you to like speak up, talk to us, figure out your place in the movement, and we'll be in a better, we'll have a better world and a happier and a more joyous world as a result of that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bindu.
Thank you, Bindu. You mentioned my number 1 and 2. I appreciate that. So I can move on to the number 3 that I had in mind, which is, election is coming up. Make sure you pick your leaders and at every level, your city council, your state and the federal level, and vote for people who are trying to create a society where justice will be available for everybody, which is an equitable society for all. Because poverty, like we already said, homelessness, and even how much is per hourly, the lowest pay, right? $15 per hour. These all affect survivors in more ways than you can think, right? It all affects us, but it affects them more than some of us. So definitely when you are voting, please look at the policies these people are supporting and how we can actually create a better community for all of us.
That's great. Thank you, Zakia.
I'm really glad I get to go last, because now I can build on what everybody else is saying. So I also have 2 things to say, and I'll say it fast because I know we're probably running over time. One, please stop treating it as an issue that belongs inside the house to a family. It is not a family's dysfunction. It is not something to be sorted out by the couple. Please treat the issue as something that needs community organizing, community education, community efforts. So it's not that 2 people just one day got up and decided that I will be, open to abuse and I'm going to be abusive. It is a learned behavior. It is a systems issue. It's a product of everything we are all doing every day in our community. So take accountability. I will actually, in fact, I always say join the movement, but I'm going to say you are the movement. We are only putting the band-aid. Each of us is the movement. That is what I really, really want to say. And second, I'm going to say, when you know that something is going wrong, or if you feel somebody is going through a difficult time, please know that your friendship, especially during the pandemic, could be the one ray of light. Really, friends and families can reach where hotlines may not be able to reach right now. So please be open, educate yourself, show up. Your kindness, it may feel like you're doing nothing when you're listening to somebody, you're doing nothing when you're just showing up every day to make sure they're okay, but that can be the one ray of light that can help somebody get through a dark time and to a point where perhaps when services are open or they're able to access something, or they're in a place where they feel like processing what is going on. So do not underestimate the power of you as an advocate for someone, keeping in mind that whatever they want to do is what you want to follow. You don't want to force them to do it, but just be there. Your friendship can mean the world. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shailaja. And I do want to also point out that Sabrina Farrell from the Family Justice Center just sent us a note saying, that the Family Justice Center is open for survivors as well. There is a number, and we'll make sure to include it as part of our kind of social media post as well. Anybody can walk in 8 to 5 p.m. and can call for services 24/7. The number is 510-267-8800. So thank you so much, Bindu, Shailaja, and Zakia for the impactful work that you and your agencies do and for participating in the conversation today. Thanks to our lovely audience for joining us today, and we appreciate you participating in such an important topic. We hope you found today's presentation engaging and insightful as much as I did, and I'm sure Rita and Malvika will join me as well as I say that. I thank you once again and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. Thank you to Deepthi for organizing this, the conceptualization of it. I forgot to say that, but thank you so much for having us today.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And yes.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.